What would you do if you were given everything without working for it? Would you be grateful, or would you become lazy and expect life to always give you more? These questions became part of my life when I saw how my husband lived each day in our little village by the sea. My name is Sophia, and I lived in a small fishing town in Greece. The mornings there were quiet, with the sound of waves and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery. But in my house, mornings were heavy and slow, because my husband Elias loved his sleep more than anything else. He did not wake up early to work like other men. Instead, he stayed in bed until the sun was high in the sky. Before I continue, I would love to know something from you. Where are you listening from right now? Which country, which city? Please share it in the comments below. And if you enjoy stories like this one, do not forget to subscribe so you can hear a new story every week. Most mornings, I went to the bakery of our neighbor, Nikos. He was kind to us and often gave bread without asking for money. He used to smile, but in his heart, I knew he was not happy about it. One day, his face was cold when I arrived. He told me that if Elias wanted more bread, he had to help him carry sacks of flour from the mill. I felt ashamed. I carried the bread home and told my husband what Nikos had said. Elias only laughed. He said that work was for people who did not know how to wait for life's blessings. He believed that what was meant for us would arrive without hard labor. I looked at him, tired of his words, but I said nothing. That afternoon, Elias left the house slowly, whistling to himself as he walked up the hill behind our home. He liked to lie on the grass there and watch the sky. The sun was strong, and the cicadas sang loudly. He was smiling when a sound broke his peace. A cart was rushing down the hill, its wooden wheels shaking, and inside the cart there was a small boy holding on and crying. The donkey had broken free, and the cart was moving too fast. Elias jumped up and ran to the road. With both hands he pulled at the cart and managed to stop it before it reached the rocks below. The boy was safe, and soon an old fisherman with a white beard came running. He was the boy's grandfather. The old man thanked Elias again and again. He said not everyone would have the courage to stop a moving cart. Elias smiled and said that it was not courage, only good luck that he was there. The old man looked at him carefully and then said something strange. He told Elias that kindness never goes unseen and that blessings come to those who expect nothing in return. He asked Elias to follow him. Elias was curious, so he walked with the old man further up the hill. They came to a place where rocks stood in a circle. The old man pointed to one large stone. He told Elias that under this rock there was something that only he was meant to find. Elias bent down and, to his surprise, moved the heavy stone without effort. Underneath there were palm leaves covering something. When he lifted the leaves, he saw 6 old wooden jars. Inside each jar there were pearls, shining white and smooth, like drops of the moon. Elias gasped, and when he looked up to thank the old man, the hill was empty. He was alone. For a moment he thought it must be a dream. But when he put his hand into one jar, he felt the cool pearls and placed a few in his pocket. He covered the jars again with leaves and pushed the rock back. Then he sat down under a tree, and without noticing, he fell asleep. When he woke up, the sun was lower, and he felt hungry. He touched his pocket and heard a soft clinking sound. The pearls were still there. His heart beat fast. He walked down the hill quickly, thinking about his wife and the food she could buy with these pearls. At home, I listened to his story with wide eyes, not sure if I believed him. But when he placed the pearls in my hand, I could not deny the truth. That evening, I went to Nikos's bakery, and when I gave him 3 pearls, his mouth opened in shock. He gave me bread, meat, and even a bottle of wine, more than I had ever carried home before. The next morning, Nikos came to our house to hear the whole story from Elias. My husband told him about the old fisherman, the rock, and the jars. Nikos listened with burning eyes. He asked why Elias did not bring all the jars home. Elias explained that they were too heavy, and he had no donkey to carry them. He said again his favorite words, "What is meant for you will find its way." Nikos pretended to agree, but I could see greed growing in his face. He offered his donkeys and told Elias they could go together at night and take all the jars. They would share them, half and half. Elias was happy because he trusted Nikos, and he thought they could become rich without much effort. But that night, when Elias was fast asleep beside me, Nikos did not come to knock at our door. Instead, he took his donkeys and some men to the hill. They moved the rock and uncovered the jars. His men opened them one by one, but there were no pearls inside. The jars were full of seaweed and broken shells. Nikos grew angry. He shouted that Elias had tricked him. He told his men to carry the jars down the hill anyway, to leave the worthless things in front of our house, and then he returned to his bakery. At dawn, I woke and tried to open the door, but something was blocking it. Elias pushed from inside, but the door only opened a little. When he opened the window instead, hundreds of shining pearls poured inside and rolled across the floor. I gasped, covering my mouth with my hands. Elias laughed softly and said, "You see, Sophia, blessings arrive when they are meant to. They do not need chasing." The days that followed felt unreal. I had lived in that small village all my life, and never before had I touched anything as precious as pearls. When Elias poured them into my hands, I felt a strange mix of joy and fear. Joy because with them I could buy food and clothes, and maybe even new shoes. Fear because I wondered if blessings like this could last, or if they would disappear as suddenly as they appeared. Nikos, the baker, tried to hide his anger, but everyone could see the change in him. His friendly smile was gone, and his eyes followed Elias with suspicion. He no longer gave bread for free, but it did not matter now because we could pay. In fact, Elias gave him pearls every time we wanted bread, cheese, or olives. At first, Nikos accepted them with a forced smile, but soon whispers began in the village. People asked where Elias had found such wealth. Some believed he had stolen from a merchant ship. Others said he had made a secret deal with pirates. I stayed silent because who would believe the truth about an old fisherman and jars of treasure under a rock? Elias, however, did not care what people thought. He lived as he always had, slow and lazy, sleeping late and eating well. He told me again and again that blessings did not come from chasing, but from waiting with patience. I tried to agree, but in my heart I began to wonder, was it not dangerous to live like this? Could luck run out one day? One afternoon, a neighbor came to our house. She was a poor widow with 3 small children. She asked if Elias could give her some pearls so she could buy food for her family. I felt my heart move, and I wanted to help her. But Elias only smiled and said, "If blessings are meant for you, they will come." The woman left with tears in her eyes, and I felt ashamed. That night, when Elias slept, I cried quietly into my pillow. What kind of blessing was this if it could not be shared? The next morning, when I went to buy flour, I heard women whispering in the market. They said my husband was selfish. They said he was rich, but blind to the suffering of others. Their words cut into me like a knife. I wanted to shout that it was not me, that it was his choice, but I remained silent. I carried the flour home with heavy steps. Days passed, and then one night, Nikos returned to the hill with his men. He was not ready to give up. He believed that Elias had tricked him before, and that the real pearls were still under the rock. He told his men to move it again and open the jars, but once more the jars were full of seaweed and shells. In his anger, he kicked one of the jars, and the sound echoed across the night. One of his men whispered that perhaps the jars were protected by spirits of the sea, but Nikos refused to listen. He left with nothing, his heart growing darker each day. Meanwhile, in our house, pearls continued to appear. Sometimes we found them on the floor by the window. Sometimes they lay in the corner of the room when we woke. Once I even found them inside a loaf of bread, shining softly between the crumbs. At first it felt like magic, but soon I grew uneasy. Why were these pearls appearing in such strange ways? Was it truly a gift, or was it a curse that we did not yet understand? The village began to change too. Where there had once been friendship, now there was envy. People looked at me differently, as if I no longer belonged among them. Children who once smiled at me now whispered behind their hands. Women who once shared food and stories with me now closed their doors when I passed. I began to feel like a stranger in my own town. One evening, Elias came home carrying fish. I was surprised because he never went fishing. He laughed and told me that a fisherman had given them to him in exchange for a single pearl. That night, as we ate, he seemed happy. But I looked at the fish and thought about the poor widow with her hungry children. Why did Elias not give her pearls too? Why did he only trade when it pleased him? The days grew warmer, and soon summer arrived. The sea shone bright blue, and ships came more often to the harbor. Merchants brought cloth, spices, and wine. Elias wanted to buy everything. He told me to dress in silk, and he wanted new shoes of leather. I tried to stop him, but he laughed. He said there would always be more pearls. Yet deep inside, I felt afraid. Could any blessing last forever if it was wasted so easily? One morning, I walked to the edge of the sea alone. The waves touched my feet, and I closed my eyes. I prayed silently for guidance. I asked if it was right to live like this, waiting for gifts without work, while others struggled every day. I asked if I was guilty for staying silent. The wind blew softly, and for a moment, I thought I heard a voice in it, telling me that blessings carry both light and shadow, and that how we use them decides our path. When I returned home, Elias was asleep as usual. Pearls lay scattered across the floor, shining in the sunlight. I looked at them for a long time, then I gathered a handful and put them in a small bag. That evening, when Elias was not watching, I walked quietly to the poor widow's house and gave them to her. Her eyes filled with tears, and she kissed my hands. For the first time since the pearls had come, I felt peace, but peace did not last. The next day, Nikos came to our house. His face was hard, his voice sharp. He said he knew we had a secret place where the pearls came from, and he demanded that Elias show it to him. Elias only laughed and told him to stop chasing what was not meant for him. Nikos's hands shook with anger. He shouted that it was unfair for one man to have everything while others had nothing. He left, slamming the door, and I felt cold fear in my stomach. That night, I could not sleep. I thought about Nikos, about the envy in his eyes, and about the way the village now looked at us. I realized that wealth had not brought happiness. Instead, it had brought suspicion, anger, and distance. Even between me and Elias, something was breaking. I still loved him, but I could not accept his blindness to the pain of others. The next morning, as the sun rose, I watched him sleep. His face was peaceful, like a child's. I wondered if he even understood the danger around us. I wondered if he cared. I touched his hand gently and whispered to myself, maybe one day he would see what I saw, but deep inside I was no longer sure. The morning after Nikos left our house, I felt the air in the village change. It was not only about him, it was about all the people around us. The looks they gave me were sharper, as if my skin had turned into glass and they could see every secret inside me. Mothers pulled their children closer when I walked past, and men stopped their talk when I came near. I wanted to hide, but where could I go? This was the only place I had ever known. Elias seemed blind to it all. He woke late, as usual, stretched his arms, and asked me what I would cook for lunch. When I told him about the whispers, he smiled and said that people were always jealous when they saw someone else living more easily. He said their envy was not our problem. He told me to trust the blessings, to trust that what was meant for us would stay with us. But my heart was heavy. I could not believe it was so simple. One afternoon, when the heat pressed down on the village, Nikos came again. He did not knock politely. He pushed the door open and stood in our room with his eyes on the pearls that lay on the table. His face was red with anger. He shouted at Elias and said the whole village had a right to know where these treasures came from. He claimed that the pearls belonged to everyone, not to one man. Elias leaned back and laughed softly. He told Nikos that greed was eating him alive. He told him to leave. Nikos clenched his fists, and for a moment I thought he would strike my husband. But he turned and walked out. I ran to the window and watched him storm down the street. My heart pounded. I knew he would not give up. That night I could not sleep. I listened to the wind outside, to the sound of the sea. I wondered if blessings were supposed to bring peace, or if they were simply a test. I thought about the poor widow and her children. They had eaten because I gave them pearls in secret. That memory gave me more comfort than all the new clothes and food in my house. I began to wonder if the true gift was not the pearls themselves, but what we chose to do with them. At dawn, I heard movement outside. I opened the window quietly and saw shadows near the hill. Nikos had returned, but this time he was not alone. He had brought men from the village with him. They carried tools and ropes. My chest grew tight. They were going to search for the treasure again, and this time they would not stop until they had destroyed everything in their way. I shook Elias awake and told him what I had seen. He yawned and told me not to worry. He said the jars would never give themselves to greedy hands. But I could not rest with such easy words. I put on my shawl and went outside. I walked up the hill alone, my feet heavy with fear. When I reached the circle of rocks, I saw Nikos and his men pulling at the great stone. Their faces were dark with sweat and anger. They moved it aside and opened the jars. I stood at the edge, my breath caught in my throat. This time, the jars were not filled with pearls, nor with seaweed. They were filled with black water, thick and foul-smelling. The men cried out and stepped back. Nikos shouted that it was a trick, but no one listened. The water spilled onto the ground and spread like ink, staining the earth. One of the men looked at Nikos and said they should leave it alone. He said nothing good would come from chasing what was not theirs. The others agreed, and one by one they dropped their tools and walked away. Nikos stood there alone, his face twisted in rage. He bent down, put his hands into the black water, and tried to scoop it up, but it slipped through his fingers, leaving only a dark stain on his skin. He cursed loudly, but his voice echoed against the rocks and sounded empty. I turned and walked back down the hill, my legs shaking. When I reached home, Elias was still sitting at the table, calm as if nothing had happened. I told him what I had seen. He only smiled and said again, "Blessings cannot be stolen." But I could not smile with him. I was tired of his simple words. I wanted him to see the truth as I saw it. The days after that were heavy. The pearls still appeared in our house, but they no longer brought me joy. Every time I touched them, I remembered Nikos's stained hands, the anger in the village, and the distance growing between me and the people I once called friends. I began to see the pearls not as gifts, but as chains. They tied us to envy, to suspicion, to loneliness. One evening, I sat by the sea and watched the sunset. The sky was red and gold, and the water shone like fire. I held a small bag of pearls in my hand. They were smooth and beautiful, but I felt no love for them. Instead, I felt a quiet decision forming in my heart. I stood up, walked to the edge of the rocks, and opened the bag. The pearls slipped into the water one by one, sinking out of sight. The waves closed over them, and they were gone. When I returned home, Elias asked me where the pearls were. I looked at him and told him that I had given them back to the sea. His face went pale. He shouted that I was foolish, that I had thrown away our future. But I stood firm. I told him that the pearls were never ours to keep. I told him that blessings are not about holding, but about letting go, about giving when others need. I told him that if we held on too tightly, they would turn into curses. He stared at me for a long time. Then he turned away and went to bed without a word. I sat alone in the dark, my heart beating fast, but I felt lighter than I had in many weeks. The next morning, something strange happened. For the first time since the old fisherman had shown Elias the jars, no pearls appeared in our house. The floor was empty, the table bare. Elias looked around in silence. He did not speak to me all day. That night, he lay in bed with his back to me, and I wondered if he hated me. But I did not regret my choice. As days passed, the village slowly began to calm. People stopped whispering. The widow smiled at me when I passed, and one of her children waved. The market women spoke to me again, carefully at first, then more warmly. It was as if the air had cleared, as if the shadow had lifted from our house. Elias still looked sad, but I hoped he would one day understand. Weeks later, I walked again to the hill where it all began. The stone was still there, but the earth around it was dry and cracked. There were no jars, no pearls, no black water. It was empty, as if nothing had ever been hidden there. I stood quietly, listening to the wind. For a moment, I thought I heard the voice of the old fisherman, soft and distant, saying that blessings are not treasures to hold, but lessons to carry. I walked back down the hill with a strange peace in my heart. Life would not be easy. We would still need to work for bread, for fish, for clothes, but that was how life was meant to be. Work gave meaning to food, effort gave meaning to rest, and kindness gave meaning to everything. When I reached home, Elias was sitting outside, looking at the sea. He turned his head slowly and looked at me. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he whispered that maybe I had been right, that maybe the pearls were never meant to stay. His voice was low, but his eyes were softer than before. I sat beside him, and for the first time in many months, I felt close to him again. The treasure that had found us had taught us more than we expected. It had shown us the weight of greed, the danger of envy, and the loneliness of keeping blessings only for ourselves. But it had also shown me something brighter, that peace lives not in what you hold, but in what you give. And in that moment, as the waves touched the shore, I felt truly free. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel so you can hear more every week. Also, I would love to know your thoughts. What would you have done with the pearls? Would you keep them or give them away? Share your answer in the comments below.